Namaskar and welcome to this exciting episode of Sattology Debunking Mythology. Sat means truth, Logos means a study or science, Sattology means a science of truth or study of truth. Opposite of that is mythology, which means a science of fake lie imagination or study of fake lie imagination. Do not use the word mythology for Vedic scriptures, Puranas, and any of the Vedic texts because all of them have been proved correct from archaeological, astronomical, and geographical point of view. Okay? All three aspects, and and also the wisdom that is contained in those shastra is virtually the original one. The world has copied from there, but it's the original thought process. So I have very special guest today, and we are going to speak many things that how out of India migrations happened. Without delay, let us welcome Sri Vedveer Arya.
Namaste Aditya ji.
Vedveer Arya is a researcher at par excellence, and he also has been in this field for a very long time. So Vedveer ji, before we start off, I want to really talk about Atmanirbhar, because this is a very buzzword nowadays. And
Yes.
you are in an organization which is really taking forward Atmanirbharta.
Yes.
I'll just give an example of the Western world. Any US or Russia, they are known adversaries for a very long time. And Europe, even though Europe and US are allies, but there will never be an instance where an American force will use any foreign weapon for their own help or assistance in any conflict situation also. But in Indian context, we see that the Indian forces want to become like the European forces or American forces. And in that context, they ignore the local technologies and local programs. What do you have to say on that before we begin with this session?
Yes, that Atmanirbharta, it means the self-reliance. It is, I think, every country must achieve that status. Why? Because you can't fight a war with the imported muscles. You have to, your own defense manufacturing industry or your industry must support your needs of defense equipment. I think India is progressing in that direction. It little slow, but now we may be much faster. We will move on that direction, and I think in the ministry as well as the industry has the both private and public. Thereafter, the research organizations and even academia, all are participating to come out of the, at least they should develop very advanced technologies. So first masters the basics of the modern warfare, means what are the equipments are available. So you have to at least match the technology to own, we have to own such technologies. So I think last 10 years, what we have achieved is remarkable, and we may achieve much more. But yes, one more, since I am normally look into the historical perspective, if you look into the, at least in the past, the entire so-called Damascus steel is actually Indian steel.
Utkrishta.
Imported by the every in the Western world, and we were the first, I think, defense exporters to the Western world. So all swords made by Indian steels only, last 2000 years or 3000 years. So even the shipbuilding, we were very far ahead. So it's only, I think, last 200 years we were just left behind. We have to just catch up the world, and even we may leave behind them also.
True,
Yes,
that's true. And even the, like, if you look at Mahabharata, Ramayana, we all see ample examples of using your own strength with a strategy, because the conflicts will always be there. It has always been there from the beginning of creation. And and any army which fights on the foreign weapons or has a mindset of procuring during the time of war has collapsed. Any army.
Yes, you have rightly quoted Mahabharata. The war chariots ever used in the world, it was actually by the Indians. And the Sanoli, there is an archaeological evidence, the oldest chariots found in the world are actually in India. And even Al-Biruni, he mentions that it was actually an Indian king who invaded Egypt. He introduced war chariots to the Egypt. It means it was actually Indians introduced the war chariots to the Western world. So in a way, that was our also defense export during those times. And driven by two horses. This also mentioned by the Al-Biruni. Otherwise, they just had a normal bullock carts or a horse-driven some small chariot, but never used chariots in the war.
And also there is a big concept of horses not being in India. Again, a lie being spread, myth. If you read Mahabharata, there are multiple types of horses: Hindu horses, Parsi horses, and their definition of India is so small. But if you look at Mahabharata, the definition of India goes to Uttar Kuru. So they used to get horses from all over the world to fight. It was all part of Bharat.
Yes.
Hastinapur Samrajya.
No, not only. There is a reference in the Mahabharata to Arattas. Arattas are almost northern Iran and the so-called Ariana, the area. Actually, Seleucus handed over this to the Sandrocotus, as mentioned by the Greek historians. So that the Arattas were actually, they were the horse traders. Even our Ashwapati in Kekaya during Vedic period, actually he used to control the trade of horses during that time. So it's a long history of Indian defense exports.
That's right.
We actually dominated every area: knowledge, commerce, various commodities, even cloths. Muslin, nobody knows very recently. There was a debate on the origin of the muslin, maybe Sumeria and somewhere. It's not, or Mosul somewhere. But these are all actually the origin of the cotton cloth was also India. So that's why, if you see, even when Alexander invasion, they were not wearing any cotton clothes. They just found that Indian soldiers are wearing some better clothes than what Greek army was wearing that. Right. And India, actually, that elephantry, that was also in the defense. First time Indians used it.
That's right.
So that's why the Seleucus gave so much of land to get 500 elephants. So the elephantry was also the Indian concept.
Yeah, there is a war, a Pyrrhic war, Pyrrhia.
Yes.
There were 500 elephants were used over there to conquer Rome, actually.
Yeah, I think olden days they were there. The elephants were used as tanks.
Tanks, yes. and also there was I put in my book based on the University of Moscow's research on Chandragupta Maurya. The Indian arrows were 2 meters long, 2 meters.
Yes.
So when they would hit the Greek army, then they'll kill 2 people at the same time.
Yes.
And so they were not able to fight with that also. And so the entire myth I already wrote in my book, Alexander the Mouse. I got a lot of flack for that. But Alexander he ran away. So out of India migrations, we naturally begin from here.
Yes.
And I think that's the whole talk today. And I think, what we were saying, that Aryans went from India to the West, it was Aryan conquest of the West or civilized conquest of the West. Is this the right thing to say?
Yes, we can say the conquest is the what it appears that you had already one civilization which you have conquered.
Yeah.
Actually, we have originated the Western civilization.
That's right.
Whatever, we don't know what was the prehistory, but whatever the civilizational history is only the Indian migrants having actually when they can, then only our civilization began. How that is, we will talk about the chronologically, because the timeline is very, very important to understand how this actually the Aryan invasion or Aryan migration theory was established based on the linguistics as well as the Indian chronologically. They think that India had no chronological history beyond 1500 BC. So then some kind of a Harappan civilization flourished, what they think, but that collapsed. Thereafter, I think Central Asia and whatever the steppe, from that area, Aryans invaded or migrated on India. But this theory has no evidence till date. First, if Central Asians, okay, they were the actually the Sanskrit born in Central Asia. We don't have any evidence, not even a single text or one line or one anything, no evidence of Sanskrit language. First. Second, I don't know how they landed in India and became so learned people suddenly. Why the same knowledge not existed in the Central Asia? And the genetic studies also prove that if migrations happened during that time, it means we have to accept that at least 1:6 the migrants must, because the kind of a genetic profile or demography, it suggests that migrants were more than the indigenous people. So all are false theories. I don't want to go into the negating the Aryan invasion theory. It is actually a debunked theory. If we establish the correct chronological history of India, it is actually the Indians who migrated to the westwards. So let us discuss how these migrations happened. Before that, I'll just give you the brief chronology of ancient antiquity of Indian civilization. This, I think, in many sessions, I have explained how early Vedic era commenced around 14,500 BCE and 13,500 BCE, around that 1,000 years. Thereafter, Vedic period, and the Vedas were compiled around 11,000 to 10,500 BCE. Thereafter, there is a post-Vedic period. This is around 3,000 or 4,000 years. Thereafter, the Krita Yuga actually ended, and Treta Yuga are 1,200 years, and 2,400 years is the Dwapara Yuga. Now, Kali Yuga is continuing more than 5,200 years. So this is our chronological history or chronological milestones of the antiquity of Indian civilization. So this chronology has a series sheet anchors, which these sheet anchors have been explained by me many times. First, the early Vedic era, because all Vedic texts refer to Sharad Ritu as the beginning of the new year. So when Sharad Ritu means the autumnal equinox was at Ashwini Nakshatra, first nakshatra of Aries. So this event can only be dated around 13,500 BCE. And Vishwamitra, who reset the nakshatra starting from Shravana, that actually indicate the summer occurrence of summer solstice at Shravana, 13,500 BCE. Then the Mrigashiradi list means a Prajapati and Daksha's 27 daughters. This was the first 28 nakshatra list was prepared around 11,200 BCE, when winter solstice used to occur at Mrigashira, that is Orion. Then Rohinyadi list after 1,000 years. The Vedic rishis observed that now Prajapati or the Samvatsara shifted from Mrigashira to Rohini. So there is a reference in Mahabharata how Brahma reset the nakshatra list starting from Rohini nakshatra. So this indicates the shifting of winter solstice at Rohini, some 10,200 BC. And then we have the Kritikadi list, Atharva Veda and the Nakshatra Sukta. And Nakshatra Sukta clearly gives the list of nakshatras starting from Kritika. And all our Aranyakas, Brahmanas, refer to the list Kritikadi list of nakshatras. So winter solstice was at Kritika around 9200 BCE. Then thereafter, presently, entire Indian astronomy follows Ashwinyadi list, nakshatra list starting from Ashwini. Actually, this list was finalized around 7400 BCE when winter solstice shifted to Ashwini nakshatra around 7400 BCE. And finally, we'll get one absolute date of Surya Siddhanta. The Mayasura says that he wrote or he actually followed an epoch of conjunction. This great conjunction of all planets in Aries on a particular day, that is Chaitra Shukla Pratipada, the first day of Chaitra lunar month. And this conjunction can only be dated in 1 lakh years, that is, or 100,000 years. That is only one date, that is 22nd February 6778 BC. So this is how the Indian Siddhanta astronomy, the commencement of Indian Siddhanta astronomy has to be dated around 22nd February 6778 BC. It means India has a history of Siddhantic astronomy of almost 8,800 years. So these are the, based on the astronomical evidences, I have fixed the sheet anchors here. And the absolute date, because that gives a perfect sheet anchor, that is 6778 BCE. That is the actually the date of Mayasura Surya Siddhanta. So based on these sheet anchors, we can firmly establish the Indian chronology. Indian antiquity goes back to more than 16,000 years. So now, when we unfold the chronological history of India, it clearly indicates that in the beginning of the early Vedic era, the Adityas, the Kashyapa had two wives, Aditi and Diti. Aditi's sons were Adityas and Diti's sons were Daityas. And Daityas, in that lineage, Danu, mother, Danu, the sons of Danu became Danavas. So that Daityas and Danavas had, so in a way, the Devas, the Adityas and Daityas, or Devas or Danavas, were actually cousins during the Vedic era. But they went into political rivalry, and that led to migration of Danavas towards westwards. So let us first discuss how that migration of Danavas took place during the early Vedic period. Before that, let us explore the antiquity of Western civilizations. So let us first discuss the first, these 5 ancient civilizations, Greek and Anatolian, because first Anatolia, from Anatolia to Greek, that migration, the civilizational history. Then Persian civilization, Sumerian, Egyptian, and Assyrian civilization. So this Greek and Anatolian civilization, how this, because the Danavas, as per my research and based on the various texts and others, Danavas, when they migrated to Anatolia and Greece, they came to be known as Denans. And the Dionysus, the word everywhere, there is a Danava word is very much used. So these Danavas migrated when there was a conflict between Devas and Danavas during the period of Indra and Vritrasura. There was a very Rigveda itself mentions about the conflict between Indra and Vritrasura. So that Danavas, they migrated first from India to somewhere Anatolia, and most probably this migration took place around 13,800 to 12,000 BC. And thereafter, the same Danavas from Anatolia migrated to Greece somewhere 12,000 to 10,500 BC. So this is this migration led to, this migration laid the foundation of the Western civilization, we must say. And as per the genetic evidence, the origin of R1b, because R1a is an Indian origin, But modern geneticists, they say that no, Central Asia had the origin of R1A, and the R1B somewhere origin Europe. But it's not correct. The migration of Danavas, because Indians also have the R1B genes. So most probably when Danavas migrated to the Western in the West towards Anatolia and Greece, this probably the gene, the R1B, the origin of R1, the history, if we can track, then probably R1B was also transmitted around 14,000 to 12,000 BCE in the Europe. So the origin of R1B also we should trace in India if we follow the proper chronological history. Now, it is well known that Atlantis city was submerged by sea. And this submergence of Atlantis city took place in the meltwater pulse 1b, because as per the oceanographic study, meltwater pulse 1a took place somewhere 12,500 to 11,800, and thereafter this same submergence, pulse 1b, this took place around somewhere 10,000 to 9,000 BC. And the Plato, he clearly mentioned that Atlantis city was submerged by sea 9,000 years before his lifetime. So modern historians don't believe, because they don't go beyond anything, the chronology beyond the Bible. So they think that nothing existed before 2000 BCE or maximum 4000 BCE. So the Plato was totally, the statement is totally false. So no historian has ever done any research about how Atlantis city can be dated 9,000 years before the lifetime of Plato. So the Greek philosopher had actually a traditional history of Greece, and this Atlantis city was actually settled by the same Danans, the Danavas, and that city existed near Gibraltar, somewhere out of Spain. Probably an island existed close to the Spain and other. So this city and entire island was submerged around 10,000 BC, just beginning of the meltwater pulse 1b. And probably it is also possible some Danans may have landed in America as well as maybe South America during that time, because we have to trace. But presently, the American origin is not the subject actually, because anything has gone from the Europe only. So we can now exactly date the Atlantis city as given by the Greek philosopher Plato. And Greek philosopher Plato had knowledge of exact dating, rough dating of the submergence of Atlantis city from the Greek tradition. So there is no even an iota of evidence to reject this, because various Greek historians and scholars mentioned about the submergence of Atlantis city. So this is how we have to date Greek civilization at least before 10,000 BC, because the Greek cities existed before 10,000 BC. So this is the one possibility where Indian Danavas migrated towards. This is the reason why the Greek mythology and Indian mythology or Vedic mythology are almost have some kind of similarities, though they totally different. But the mythology is not actually, we can say it's a fiction. Actually, when history has been the historical, the stories of history, when exaggerated by poets and others, or in a traditional narrative, little mythological interpolations are you exaggerate in a different way. But it does not mean that you reject the entire mythology. We have to extract the history from the mythology, or the historical, whatever the narrative existed during the ancient period of Greece. So we can create, but modern historians just reject the entire Greek history prior to the Trojan War is actually mythology. Nothing existed as per that. It's a fiction, but it's not a fiction. There was a history, and the submergence of Atlanticity must be traced. I think some marine archaeologists should try somewhere closer to the Gibraltar thing. So the city can be probably that we don't know what kind of a city existed at that time. May not have built with the stone others. Probably they may had only wooden structures. So I don't know. Is it possible to even trace back such an ancient city even today? Now, Anatolian civilization, it is well-known archaeological sites, Göbekli Tepe and Nevali Kori. And this also, actually, we have, this is the around 10,000 to 8,000 BC, because the charcoal found in this area has been carbon dated. And the carbon dating indicates somewhere closer to 9,500 BC to 8,000 BC, when that this civilization ended. It means the beginning has to be dated beyond 10,000 BC. So the first settlers of Dhanava, probably these two cities, Göbekli Tepe and Nevali Kori, maybe the first settlements made by the Dhanavas migrated from India. And you can clearly see a priest head with the shikha. And this is only possible in Indian civilization. Even today, the priests have the shikha. Vedic priest had a shikha. Even the Dhanavas, because Dhanavas and Devas were cousins. So most probably an Asura priest had a shikha, and this was found in these areas. Actually, when B.G. Siddhartha, he is the Director General of Birla Science Museum, Hyderabad. He personally went to these the museums where all artifacts collected from these two sites, and he studied and he presented this photograph of a priest having a shikha. And even there is another relief having a Garuda, sun, and the scorpion. Some astronomical or some kind of religious symbols. So these can be established that indicate actually, especially this priest having a shikha indicates clearly the migration of Dhanavas from India to Anatolia and Anatolia to Greece. Then now, that is I just explained the origin of the Danans, the Dhanavas, how they migrated from India to Anatolia, Anatolia to Greek. That led to the establishment of the Greek civilization and Anatolian civilization. And now the Persian civilization. Actually, there was the Deva-Dhanava conflict at least 2,000 years before the Asura, Deva-Asura conflict. That was Indra-Vritrasura conflict. After that, we had an Indra and Shambhara conflict. This took place around 11,300 BC, where the Devas and Asuras, they had also political rivalry and a sangram, a war between Devas and Asuras. Finally, Indra defeated Shambhara, and he took over more than 100 settlements of Asuras. That forced Asuras to migrate towards Persia. So they migrated to Persia, and Asuras also spoke same Sanskrit, but had a different grammar, minor differences. So I just mentioned a dialect of Vedic Sanskrit, but actually Asuras spoke the same Sanskrit with the different pronunciation and some different words. May not be different words, but different pronunciation. Because these things have been mentioned in Brahmana, that Asuras used to say He Arya as a Helaya. Instead of Ra, they can make it only La. So these minor differences only actually between the Asura language and Deva language. Actually, the language of Devas and Asuras was the same. That was the Vedic Sanskrit. So Even some Brahmana text clearly indicates that Asuras had Asura Veda, like Devas had Rig Veda, Yajur Veda, Sama Veda. The Asuras had their own Veda, and most probably the Asura Veda was compiled in Asura Sanskrit, but we don't have any trace of that Asura Veda today. And Asura Sanskrit, same Asura Sanskrit, evolved into Avestan language. The Avestan language in which Avesta was compiled by Zoroaster. So Zoroaster lived around 7000 BCE, and this date also given by the Greek philosophers. They say that Zoroaster existed around 6000 before a particular timeline. So that date goes back to around 7000 BC. So this Zoroaster, what he did, he actually recompiled Asura Veda in Avestan language that time. So the Asura Sanskrit, we don't have any trace, since that Sanskrit had been evolved into Avestan language. Now that same Asura Veda has been recompiled into Avesta by Zoroaster around 7000 BC. And but one great thing, what actually Zoroaster did, he transformed the Asura Veda into monotheism. But Asuras were not monotheist prior to Zoroaster. They also practiced polytheism. And that's why the Elamites, actually a branch of Asuras, they practiced polytheism. They never worshipped Ahura Mazda. They worshipped Humban, that we will discuss. Here, the Zoroaster, he recompiled Avesta, as well as he himself also wrote a few gathas in Avesta. So that Avesta has to be dated around 7000 BC, as given by Greek sources. It's not, I'm not giving some date which has no basis. Actually, like Plato gave the date of the submergence of Atlanticity. Similarly, I'm forgetting the name of the Greek philosopher, and they gave the date of Zoroaster also. In Greek sources, it is available. They give the date of Zoroaster around 7000 BC. So this is how Zoroaster actually laid the foundation of Zoroastrianism, that is monotheism, and only Ahura Mazda was the only one god. That theory came around 7000 BC. This is how Persian civilization evolved from Vedic era, 11,300 BC to 7000 BC. And what was the history of Persia? So let us see. This is actually Shahnama of Firdausi. I hope many people might have heard about the Shahnama, but modern historians simply reject it as a fiction or a mythology. So they don't give any history of Persian history. Starts only from Achaemenid era. Prior to that, under the Babylon and other. This is the history being taught today. But the ancient Persian history has been written by Firdausi in the Shahnama. So that's Ahura Mazda, and thereafter some Pishtatian kings. They reigned up to 3030 years. He just mentions. It is difficult to come out of a chronological history, because we have only very small information is available. But after this Pishtatian kings, then Keyumar. So then Keyumar dynasty, it starts around 11,300 BC, when the Asuras migrated towards Persia. Then Hushan, then Tamuraz, then thereafter Jamshed Jam. He was the first great emperor of Persia, the Jamshed Jam, and his descendants reigned around 700 years. Then we have the Jahak, Adi Dahaka, and a serpent king, it is mentioned. Probably some Nagas may have migrated from India and merged with the Asuras. That is possible. So this is the 1000 years reign of the Jahak or Dahaka. An evil foreign ruler has been mentioned. It clearly indicates that a migration of some Nagas to Persia possible. They conquered that land and ruled for 1000 years. This what has been mentioned by Firdausi in Shahnama. So that we can roughly date around 10,500 or 10,400 to 9,400 BC. Thereafter, what the Firdausi says, Faridun, a first Vidishian and his descendants, because this is the period where we have the Gurshas, Nariman, Sam, Zal, Rustam, and Sohrab. So many legends are there in the Persian history. But modern historians totally reject it. They think that all these people are mythological characters. They never existed in the history. But actually, the history of all the Gurushas, Nariman, Sam, and Zal have to be established around 9400 to 7900 BCE. And there is one text called Tabaqat-e-Nasri. It mentions that the gap between Faridun and Gurshas was actually 1276 years. 1276 years is the gap between Faridun and Gurushas. So you have to date accordingly. So around 7900 BCE, this dynasty, that Faridun dynasty, and as well as the reign of this Gurushas, and that time they lost the kingdom to Kayanian dynasty. The Kayanian dynasty actually founded their rule around 8000 BC. And then we have a Kubad and his son Kavi, Kavata, and even Kai Kaus, many kings. And thereafter, there are numerous references of such kings in the Avesta. So we have to date all the chronology of the rulers of Kayanian dynasty starting from 8000 to 7000 BC. Now, in same Kayanian dynasty, there is a Khusro, and we have a Vistashva. During this time, Zoroaster existed, as around 6000 years before the Plato, and even 5000 years before Trojan War. These two references are there in the Greek literature and historical documents. So we have to date accordingly the Vistash around 7000 BCE. He was the patron of Zarathustra, the first Zoroaster. And thereafter, then Kavi Vaman was ruling around. During that time, the Aratas conquered Persia, and they started ruling over Persia, and probably they ruled more than 3000 years or 3900 years over the Persia. But at the same time, Elamites, a branch of Asuras, also ruled parallel in Persia, 6500 to 2600 BC. Around this was even Elamites also existed. If you see what was the difference between the Persians and the Elamites, both had a Asura origin, but the Elamites actually worshipped Humbal, not Ahura Mazda. Not Asura. Ahura is Asura only. That Humba was Shumba. We have a history of Asuras where Shumba, Nishumbha, two Asuras existed during the Vedic period. Most probably the Elamites were the descendants of the Shumba or Nishumbha who migrated towards Persia, and they started worshipping the Humbal. In a later period, the Persians used to worship both the gods, Ahura Mazda as well as the Humbal, together, to actually have the solidarity between two different communities, because Elamites did not believe in the monotheism, where the Zoroastrian Persians, they followed the monotheism. So this is how the Persian history unfolds. And these Arattas have been mentioned in many Babylonian sources. And Mahabharata refers to Arattas. I don't know, there was no Arattas after 3000 BCE. But how Mahabharata, a text as per the modern historians, Mahabharata was written after 500 BC, after I think maybe last 2000 years as per there. But how they came to know about Arattas? Because the Aratta word, the modern historians came to know only from the tablets found. I don't know how Mahabharata knew about the Arattas during that time. No Arattas existed. So we have to establish that Mahabharata was actually written around before 3000 BC. And the Arattas were actually ruling. And it is mentioned that the Arattas came to India and actually came to the court of Yudhishthira, and they presented numerous offerings to Yudhishthira when he performed Rajasuya Yajna. This is mentioned in Mahabharata. This is how Aratta and the Elamites, they shared the kingdom of Iran. Actually, the Iran word probably came from the Aratta word as per my research, because Aratta became Ariana, and from there Arans and Iran. So this Arattas probably maybe part of Asura, or maybe are different people, but there is a mix between Arattas and Asuras mixed up, and they had actually followed the same Zoroastrianism, because there is a reference that around 3100 BC, one Aratta king celebrated Nowruz. It means a Zoroastrian festival. So Arattas also became Zoroastrians. So this is how the Persian history unfolds up to that. Thereafter, it is well known, the Babylonian, Sumerian kings, they dominated over the Persia, and then a well-known Achaemenid kings from Cyrus, they actually revived the Zoroastrianism. Probably the Zoroastrianism was corrupted due to, again, polytheism and other. So again, the Achaemenid kings, starting from Cyrus onwards, they re-established the monotheism in the Persia. So this is the history of Persia, but the origin of the Persian civilization is actually led by the migrant Asuras from India. This is how, and this migration of Asuras took place around 11,300 BC. Now, there is a very interesting a situation, the Egyptian civilization, how Egyptian, because they have a very long history, more than 30 dynasties ruled over as per the history written by Manetho. But actually, the migration of the Asuras from Persia to Egypt, that led to a foundation of a dynastic rule in Egypt. Because they, the Egyptian kings, starting from Menes was the first king of the first dynasty, as per the history or chronological history given by the Manetho. And he was the descendant of a Sam. And Sam, what Christian historian? The Christian historian of probably 1st, 2nd, and 5th century. These Christian historians concocted that Egyptians were the descendants of Sam, means Ham, who was the grand or great grandson of No. So they again linked with the biblical chronology, and they just brought forward the Egyptian chronology after the Adam and the No. So that they say that there was no history of Egypt beyond No. Actually, the Ham, the Egyptians were not the descendants of the Ham. They were the descendants of the Sam, because the son of Nariman, and he was the grandson of Gorshaf of the Persian history. When Kayanian dynasty took over the kingdom from that Fardin and the dynasty of the Nariman and the Gorshas, then the sons of this Nariman and the descendants of the Sam, they migrated to Egypt, and finally they founded a dynastic rule, and the first king was the Menes. This was the origin of Egyptians. So we can say Egyptians were originally Asuras who migrated from India, migrated to Persia, and from Persia to Egypt. This is how the origin of civilization, Egyptian civilization, can be explained. And it has an indirect link to the out of India migration also. But there are, later there was a lot of interaction between Indian traders and Egyptians. And that also led to the numerous astronomical exchange and other things that we will discuss in details in some other time. After this, we have a Sumerian civilization. Now, Sumerian civilizations, the Chaldean world, how the Chaldean, because the Berosus says that the history of Babylon is actually the history of Chaldeans. Who were those Chaldeans? And they have they say the first sea monster was the Ononus. Ono is actually Varuna word may have corrupted into Onus, and they say the sea monster, half fish and half man, probably a Matsya. A Matsya Janapada in India had a community of Matsyas. They were not anything fishermen or but they had a name of Matsya, because Matsya was the progenitor of rulers of Matsya Janapada. So these Matsyas probably migrated from that sea coastline and enter into that Persian Gulf, because Persian Gulf region flooded only after 10,000 or 9,000 BC. Prior to that, it was a very fertile area. Persian Gulf was not that Gulf not existed that time. That region was a very fertile land. So the Matsyas and the Chandravanshis from India, they migrated to the Persian Gulf region, and they actually started agriculture there. But when the Persian Gulf flooded by the sea water, when the sea levels rose, then these guys who settled in Persian Gulf, then they even shifted northwards. This is how the Babylon and this Sumerian civilization came into existence. And the Marduk, it is actually the Marut of probably the Marut god of India. This is the origin of the Sumerian civilization. This is how we have to track the chronological history of the out of India migration to establish. We will discuss the detailed history of Sumeria, how the Sumerian civilization evolved. But in my this first presentation of out of India migrations, I'm only focusing that how these civilizations originated from the out of India migrations. So these are the migrations. And then we have some more other migrations pre-Mahabharata period, like Yavanas migrated to Anatolia, Greece around 7,000 or 7,000 to 6,000 during that period. And same Yavanas came to be known as Ionians, because the Ionians were the later entrant to the Greek community. Greeks had the Denons were the earliest people, and Ionians were the later entrants to the Greek. So these Yavanas actually settled in Anatolia, and later, actually, the migration of Yavanas led to the evolution of the entire Hellenistic sciences and others. And the Yavanas were very much from India. They were the cursed sons of Turvashu, and we have enough evidences in our Puranas, Brahmanas, and the Vedic text of the origin of the Yavanas. Even Ramayana mentions that Yavanas actually existed starting from the Vedic era. Thereafter, the Scythian migration. This is also very, very important. The Scythians were actually Shakas, and Shakas also existed in the western side of India, in Pakistan and the Afghanistan area, even the Gandhar area. These Shaka, actually the Scythian word evolved from the Shakasthana. That Shakasthana is actually a central place of, or maybe a capital city of the Shakas. That's why the Shakasthana word evolved into Scythian in Greek language. So these Scythian Shakas migrated to Eastern Europe around probably first Anatolia, from Anatolia to that the Danube River near Bulgaria and other. So that's why even Danube River was called Scythian River. And I need not to say anything. You just read the Herodotus book on histories. He actually refers to northern Anatolia and Eastern Europe as the Scythia only. He never mentioned any other name. But the modern historians simply ignored the Scythia references in the historical textbooks written by Herodotus and the later. There are enough information about these Scythians. What modern historians say, these Scythians were actually maybe a part of Persians. They don't want to accept they were part of India. But Shakas were very much part of India, starting from even their origin. Actually, Shakas fought under the Rishi Vasishtha during the Rigvedic era. So that's why it is totally incorrect to say that Scythians originated from Persians. No, Scythians originated from India. And actually the Vedic Indians who settled in the Pakistan and the Afghanistan area. So this Scythian migration actually led to establishment of entire East Europe. So now you can easily track the migration of R1A gene also from India to Eastern Europe, not vice versa. So the Shakasthana, and most probably these Shakas these Shakas, because they became very powerful and they ruled over an entire up to the East Europe, starting from the this we can say the Parthia or northern Iran to towards the East Europe. And during that time, the Shakas might have been established their big cities in Pakistan, the Sindh region. So that's why the entire that so-called Harappan civilization, or so-called this Mohenjo-daro and Charnu-Dodo, those cities, actually ruled by the Shakas during that time. So that's why they had a different script. And Shakas were actually breeders of the unicorn animal. Actually, that was a unicorn horse. Even Greek historians mentioned that mentioned that unicorn was found only in India. It means these Shakas, because during the Vedic period itself, unicorn became a very rare animal, almost near the extinction. So it's difficult to say, but the Equus sivalensis, the Shivalik horse, was actually became extinct around 8000 BC. Probably the same Shivalik horse was actually unicorn. Rigveda clearly refers to Tavashringani, a horn of a horse. So what Sayana actually he translates Shringa, horn, as a hare, because it was during that time no unicorn existed during the lifetime of Sayana. So it was beyond his imagination that how Ashwa can have a Shringa. So we need to further explore whether unicorn animal, a horse with a horse-like animal, had a one horn, but we have found the head. But we need to, even I think archaeologists may have to try whether we can find the better the remains of the Shivalik horse. And this Shivalik horse had 34 ribs. It's clearly established by the archaeological evidence. And the Rigveda's Ashwa Sukta clearly mentions about the 34 ribs of Ashwa. Modern, this Equus Kabbalas, the horses, they have 36 ribs. But Rigveda refers to 34 ribs of probably a unicorn horse may have existed, and India was the only source for such animal, and that became a power symbol of Shakasthana. So that's why Shakas had that unicorn. So many seals found had the horse, the unicorn symbol. So probably Shaka had their power symbol as a horse. And we can clearly establish even their migration, because a Scythian prince married a daughter of an Egyptian pharaoh known Scott, and the progeny of Scott came to be known as Scots. The Scotland, the Scots settled in Scotland of United Kingdom. They also have a unicorn as their as they declare national animal, and numerous legends are there. So this clearly establishes our Shaka. Even the British people are actually the descendants of Shakas. I will discuss that in details. For today, I'll just stop here. How the even Shaka and Scythian migration led to evolution of entire the settlements, or the whatever the archaeological evidences found in Bulgaria, Romania, and others were actually Scythian settlements. So we have to trace the history of out of India migrations out of it. Then we will have a proper chronological history of entire world can be rewritten, and we have to clearly establish because it's the linkages between the archaeological findings and the literature have to be established based on the better sense of chronology. Presently, because last 400 years Christians dominated the academia, so they have no vision beyond 2000 BCE, probably no vision beyond 4000 BCE. We have to come out of this hypnotic influence of biblical researchers.
Beautiful, beautiful presentation, Vedveer. One of the best you have shown,
Thank you.
and with
Thank
all
you.
lot of proofs. And see, the thing is,
And I'm tracing these evidences in the Western literature only. I'm not presented in Indian literature. That only I'm supporting
no,
evidence.
my last book, Gold, Glory, and God, is a narrative using their evidences to build our story. Because the point is, they have collected right material facts, but when they apply the Eurocentric model on those material facts, then they create their own narrative, which is a problem, big problem.
See,
So
one Manetho, around 6th or from 14th century, a guy wrote a book on history, and he says that one name is there, is the Scythian prince. He was the progenitor of British. It is written. Then the modern historian declared him as a pseudo Manetho. Says no, this is unbelievable. So this book has to be rejected.
no,
Scots also originated from the father was the Scythian prince and the Egyptian mother.
no,
And the migrated Scythians and the migrated Persians were the originators of the Germans, because Germans had the Aratadar Persian origin, where the Brits had the Scythian origin. This was the reason why the Germans and British don't go together. The kind of some different race theories there.
no, it all started with papal bulls. So most of the history revisionism happened after 1492,
Yes.
very recent. And the popes authorized scholars to write history in such a way that the church appears to be the only civilized force on the planet. And we are live to many Americans. Most of the Americans have a Eurocentric view. Like, I'll just give one example. They will tell me, and a lot of good friends are there, and I respect them a lot. They will tell me in a very friendly discussion that India has a lot of poverty. Now, if I compare that with America today, I'm not talking about 20 years back, today, then Los Angeles, San Francisco, San Diego, where I live, is so much poverty on the street, so many beggars on the street. It's like homeless population is like destroying the cities. And like earlier, you could walk on in San Francisco, just walk. It was clean footpaths. Nowadays, you cannot walk. You have to jump over puddles of urine and all kinds of things on the streets here in the middle. So the poverty is a relative factor, and also Indian poverty is induced poverty by the British, and it is not the poverty which is like inherited. When the British came to the country in India, there was no beggars, and in the West there were always beggars right from the beginning, because the European class system, like for example, I'll tell you, the European settlers who ran away from Catholicism, or the European version of Christianity to America, they wanted to reject those things, and then they came to USA. But they did the same thing here. They thought that they are superior to Native Americans, and also they within themselves there were hierarchy ranks.
Yes.
So the whole class system or caste system is their brainchild, again coming from the church. And I have been very open about it when I researched my book and I wrote the book Gold, Glory, and God. And your theory here, the timelines that you gave, actually solidifies all those things.
Yes.
You know, the Sumerians,
Yes.
they will talk about the Sumerians, and the ego and the obstinacy of American academics is so high that they will not accept coming anything from a brown man. It's
Yes.
straight like that, straight. You and I can say whatever we want, and we are speaking to many of them right now. That has to end, and that has to end, because it is not the process of knowledge.
Persian Gulf, actually, that is the cradle of the Sumerian civilization, which is presently now underwater.
Yes.
Don't look at what has been found in the Iraq and near to the Babylon and the Ur and Uruk. Originally, because during Vedic period, these people migrated, because that was a fertile land there.
Yeah.
Because the rivers used to, that was the delta area. So that's why the people settled there from India, and it was very close to that and in that Gulf area. When sea level rose, then entire Gulf area got flooded. So
Yeah.
this flood actually mentioned in Sumeria, not the biblical flood. The biblical
Exactly.
flood occur much later. So every flood they link with the Bible. I don't know what kind of a nonsense is
No,
going
well,
on in
well,
Bible.
the whole notion of biblical flood is a mythology, just like zombie.
Yes.
Dead people have never walked, and
Huh.
and and they when they accuse the Hindus of superstition, and I have to ask them, what is zombie culture? What is zombie culture? What is the biblical flood? There is no biblical flood in any way. And also the Ramayana, Valmiki Ramayana gives a lot of proofs, like the Georgia is the area of Georgia being the place where Indra's Abhishek happened, and the geographical proofs of the Caspian Sea is already there, which we also discussed one time before. And so amazing presentation with Virji, wonderful.
Thank you, Aditya.
And thank you all the viewers for watching. Do comment on YouTube and let us know your feedback, and join the Sattology movement right on sattology.org. And we have to pick up every article of Wikipedia and write on sattology.org, and also comment, because we look for those comments to guide us for future events and programs. Thank you and namaste.
Namaste. Namaste.